everybody. We're here for the baseline General Assembly November session. We have quite a community here already, and sorry we're a little late today. I'm going to turn it over to Sonal Patel, who will be conducting this November meeting of the Baseline Protocol community. Sonal, take it away.
All right, thanks, John. So as usual, we'll go through our normal community updates. We'll get a standards update, outreach update, sponsorship, TSC, grants, core devs, roadmap, and then we'll open the floor to any other topics. So to kick us off, Andreas, can you give us an update on the standards work?
Sure. Thank you, Sonal. So the standards working group has resumed its work. And we have now transitioned to sort of like a standards maintainer mode, where we are going to do where we're looking at issues that people have raised, and then also reviewing PRs that are not affecting the actual requirements, but are more not cosmetic in nature, but help the readability of the document overall until it has been ratified as an official draft by the PGB, which should happen on the 17th. If people are reading, I think it's coming up for a vote. John, isn't that correct? Right. So that's where things are at. Once that vote has passed, we'll go for the full project standards approval, which we might be able to pull off early next year. And then we'll report back on where that is going, but we're having good discussions on the side also as to what is baselining, what is not suitable for baselining, and are we too strict in certain parts of the standards. So we're doing some real world pressure testing of the standard, and currently it has been holding up quite well.
Awesome. Thank you. And doesn't look like Melanie was able to make it yet, but Mark, can you give us an update on what's been happening with the outreach team?
Yeah, outreach and go-to-market. Basically, we've been hard at work at putting together the materials that we are going to be really using to get the message out, gin up the excitement and popularity and awareness. Not in that order, but what we want to do is basically engage the audience, both technical and non-technical, with a little bit more of an emphasis on the non-technical, just because we don't want to be guilty of what we've done before by trying to lead with the tech, which can be subject matter that's impenetrable to a lot of the business side of the fence. So we have right now the working deck that a lot of us and I have put together, really to capture the awareness and generate a course of action. And at the same time, what we want to do is, take the next step to see, when people are very excited about it, where do they go to find out more information? And so that's what we're trying to basically redo the website, so it gives them a nice, clear, concise way of how to go ahead and start getting baselining. So we pretty much set a deadline that we should have all of that ready. Initial draft by the 1st of December, and then we want to be able to present the rest of it to the PGB on the 8th. So that's where we are right now.
Yes, yeah, John.
I'd like to make one comment there. It's really great to see the work, and that it's that lots of different people are working on this stuff. It's great. I hope that as we work towards explaining things for business people, that we we don't commit the sin that a lot of things do, which is dumb it down. We can, we can break it down, but we shouldn't dumb it down. I think that's what I was just watching a terrible video of, ZK thing. And, it was actually a major VC that was describing it. It was like, blockchain is like a new kind of computer. I'm like, oh, no. Let's not go to that level, right? I rest.
Exactly. Exactly. And that is, the main thing that's top of mind with all of us is we are, with this content that we are paying close attention as to what's being heard as opposed to what's being said. A lot of us are veterans of, the blockchain space, and I think we know the mistakes that we made on that. Well-meaning, but that we tried to get too much too quickly. And so what we want to do is make sure that they have a straight, uncomplicated path to how do you get baseline.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. And John, can you give us some sponsorship updates?
Carol is not on, so I will say that I forgive me, but I don't have confirmation of whether we can announce there are two new sponsors and a third coming.
They confirm that we can.
They're on the
Right.
website.
Yep.
I'm sorry, did we already put them on the website?
Yep.
Okay, so they're on the website. I'm going over there now.
Logos and everything.
Yeah, so the two new ones. And actually, Jack, would you like to do the honors? You were involved in this. As Arca and Montech, right?
Yeah.
And Jack, I think you've been involved in a couple more as well, right?
Leahy or where?
Which Jack? There are two.
Jack Wiring, sorry.
Yeah, I think there are coming a couple more, yeah, but they are not yet announced, I think. So let's wait on that.
Very good. So what I'd like to say about this is that these are sponsors. These are companies that have decided that, kind of like public broadcasting, that anybody can participate in baselining, but anybody can contribute. You don't have to pay a thing. But the companies that can pay can help us, make sure the community is strong and vibrant and has the resources it needs. And ARCA and Montech have done that, and we'll have them on future events. And also we'll be featuring sponsors in. We're working on something right now where we can feature sponsors for on the website to say, hey, these are sponsors that you can reach out to help you get baselined. So there's a real benefit to being a sponsor, but a sponsorship does not give you control of the standard or the specification or the open source. That's done only by contributors. So if you want to have influence over the actual work, you have to write code or do docs or chip in. But if you want to support the work, you can be a sponsor, and the sponsorship cost is not terribly onerous, and it's based on the size of company. Reach out to Carol Geyer for more information about that.
Thank you. And we have our newly elected TSC, and John and Samrat are our TSC co-chairs. Samrat, do you have any updates on what the TSC will be working on or how the first kickoff meeting went?
Sure. Thanks, Sunal. I think we kicked off really well. We picked up some very interesting issues. I don't know if I can discuss everything here, but I think the first one being, and Mark Hattel briefly touched upon that, which is synchronizing our marketing efforts, outreach efforts with the releases. So I think that is something which we're going to be picking up and addressing very, very soon. And yeah, there are certain other points as well on the agenda. Sunil, I think you shared it on the. I think you had Twitter shared agenda, right?
Yes. So I think we.
Yeah. Quickly touch upon that.
Oh, John's sharing screen. Yep, we have 11 new TSC members representing 9 different companies. So a lot of
Super.
unique views, backgrounds, and members part of the group. But yeah, we'll have our first official meeting since the kickoff coming this week, where we have a pretty standard agenda to start covering the roadmap and items like that.
Yeah. And we're also, I think we also did a fantastic job of addressing the grants issue in the first meeting. So I personally love that as well. So yeah, that's it from my side.
Thank you. And going off of that then, so into grants. So our baseline core devs are applying for some of the remaining grant funds. And also, as we're nearing the end of the 2021 grant cycle, I'm staying in close touch with our grant recipients to get updates, as well as write-ups that will be published on our site on some easy to digest pieces of their work so the public can understand the contributions they've made. Like for example, the ZK Circuit for Bonds work that Boris and Louise presented to us on the September 22nd baseline show. They're working on a write-up right now that will get published on the site as soon as possible. And also we have Michael Carnes here with us today, who was a grant recipient for a project he did called Publishing Supply Chain. So he's going to actually walk us through some of the work that he completed. So Michael, I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself and tell us about the work you did.
Sure. Thank you. Nice to meet everybody, and a pleasure to introduce myself to you. Some background: maybe about a year ago, I was approached by Baseline to give some information about the publishing industry and see whether or not there was an opportunity for the application of Baseline in the publishing industry. So I acted on that and produced a grant request, which was approved sometime, I think it was in March, maybe a little bit later than that. The idea was to understand what areas of the publishing industry Baseline might be applied to. And the 2 areas that I put in the application were around the management of metadata and the potential application to the rights and royalties processes. So the publishing industry in the US is about a $35 billion business. It's not particularly large relative to quite a few other industries. It's also a industry that is slow to adopt new technology. And therefore it has a lot of kind of antiquated process-driven processes that make certain parts of the industry quite inefficient. In the application of metadata, the opportunity there would potentially be to exert better control over the management of metadata that's transmitted from the owner of the content, which would be, normal cases, would be a publisher. That metadata would describe all the information about the book or the content item that is being is part of the supply chain and ultimately part of a sale. And that information is transmitted to intermediaries as well as retailers, and the biggest retailer would be Amazon. And much of that data is updated routinely, and therefore there's some aspect of control that needs to take place to make it viable, make it up to date, make sure that everybody has the right information, right pricing, right availability, all of that type of stuff. So that was one thought there. And then the second one on the rights and royalties is the ability for the better control again of the disbursement of royalty payments to rights holders. And rights holders most likely are going to be a publisher, but they could be also people who have contracted with a publisher, like an author or an illustrator, some other content provider that would be receiving checks based on the sale of that content. So those were the 2 kind of areas that I looked at. My background is I've been in the industry for more than 20 years as an executive and run companies that have managed rights and royalties processes, either as a publisher or actually a software vendor, providing that solution to publishers. And I've also run a company that managed metadata. So I had some experience in this space. So I interviewed about 8 or 9 people as part of this initial phase of the project to draw some information about what might be might resonate with these folks who know more about this. And I think ultimately what I found was that because of some of the embedded resistance to adopting new technology and some of the things that folks on this call have talked about in terms of making the case for something that's quite technical, that there would be a little bit of quite a bit of resistance to adopting something like baseline for the metadata side of things. Probably wouldn't be able to make a business case around that would be compelling. As you probably know, the market is fairly structured in terms of some very, very large players like a Random House or Simon & Schuster. Those companies might be companies that might adopt something like this. They might be able to make a business case, but beyond those top 5, 10, maybe 15 players, while there's a vast number of smaller players, those companies probably wouldn't participate. It wouldn't make sense for them. So the business case there would be probably fairly narrow. On the royalty side, though, there may be some opportunity. This is a situation where there's, disbursements are oftentimes to a large group of people, and there's a lot of inefficiencies here, and there's the aspect of visibility and control that is important. So that's an area that would require a little bit more research. There's folks actually in that space that know a lot more about this, have experience with experimenting with this type of application. There's been some misstarts and some other efforts that haven't quite worked out that would need exploring. But that's kind of where we are with this. I gathered a fair amount of information about this, which I wrote up and sent in to John. Some of you on the call might be aware that Microsoft, with E&Y, is working on an initiative to improve the disbursement of royalties to Xbox rights holders. Those folks who have created software for Xbox and manage that process. So they're working on a custom process based on something similar to baseline. And that would be something that would be a good industry example for something that might be leveraged going forward. So that's a summary of what's happened so far. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the group on Michael's findings?
Mike, I got a question. Would you say the publishing industry, in general is, embracing, innovation, new ways of doing things?
Well, the industry, just like many others, is going through digital transformation. So, but for publishers, that means that they are increasingly seeing their content sold in different places. The content kind of package broken apart in many instances, where you might have sold a full journal or a full textbook. Now you're working around trying to sell the parts of that, the chapters and images and things of that sort. So that type of activity is happening, but it's I would say it's less driven by the publisher than it is by the marketplace and by the retailers, principally being Amazon, right? So yes, there's innovation there, but I wouldn't say there's a lot of that innovation driven by the publisher, if that makes sense.
Michael, have you looked at the innovations, coming from the NFT space for managing sales royalties and so on? As John's got this other project as well called the Tree Trunk, protocol for NFTs, right? But there seem to be a lot of synergies between the two.
So I participate in a kind of a large listserv, for want of a better term, on with folks that talk about things like that and talk about innovation and things that are going on in the industry. And the NFT thing has garnered a lot of comments in the last 6 to 12 months, as you might have mentioned. And there's a fair amount of skepticism about how that might work in the publishing space. Not saying it won't, but it's so early at the moment that it's hard for people to see whether or not it could be relevant. But it did come up in the interviews that I had, that if you owned kind of a token, that maybe that would be the opportunity for you to dividend that, or even separate that into pieces, so that if you owned a piece of a royalty, you could make it break it down into pieces. I'm not sure whether that applies here or not, but it's possible. But I think there's a lot of kind of hurdles to overcome before it would be adopted in the publishing industry.
I suppose one way of looking at it is, there is a lot of dubious,
Right.
value propositions in that space. But one way of leveraging it is to actually drive the conversation, towards, actual value, which would come from people, industries like yours, right? So what I'm trying to say is that you may not, see what you need, but you can drive it towards what you need if you're part of the conversation.
Yes.
Actually, if I can say, Michael, I kind of agree with you on the skepticism. People tend to pick up on these buzzwords, not understand the underlying technology, and say, NFT, that's the new panacea. I did put in the chat, and I'll put it on the Zoom chat as well, an article that was written before we were really talking a lot about NFTs, where, there's really, we have to focus on the business model.
Yeah.
Right. It's as an author that has a juicy agent. My agent doesn't like to deal with, nor does the publisher like to deal with, dispersing money to 17 or 20 or 100 different authors for a single book when they just got $3 in from the sale.
Mm-hmm.
So, managing that, but of course, managing that on a blockchain, it's a terrible idea, right? Because, you're going to burn gas fees more than the $3 that you got. So it doesn't actually solve that problem, but there are interesting business models coming. Thank you for, look, I want to thank you for the effort, and thanks for coming on the General Assembly.
Happy to do it.
And
Describe it. We will.
Will the results of those findings be shared with the rest of the group?
They should already be in the repo, or we'll be posting them. And the TSC, Sonal, if we can get that to the TSC, I think they already have it. We will vote on the grant at the next meeting, and that'll be it.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to reach out to me separately, feel free. Happy to have a conversation. If you want any background information or have any ideas you want to suggest to me, I'll be happy to follow up.
Mike, I'd like to follow up with you.
Cool.
One last point on this, and I think this would have been good for your research, that something we have today that we didn't have then, is a much more clear articulation of what the point is, which is, and I think we'll be able in future grant projects to be able to say, look for this pattern. The pattern that we didn't really equip you to look for is where we need to prove that multiple parties, usually more than two, have consistent information, and prove attributes of that information without revealing the information, the metadata, or the trace information involved in moving that data around to certainly outsiders, or even participants in parts of the workflow that aren't in that immediate work step. Right. So that's, the short version of that is coordination under zero knowledge. That is a very specific pattern, and it does actually bring up a lot of specific ideas in each industry we talk to now. Very doable things. So going forward, I think that might be something we can equip with future research. Where do you need to coordinate without letting anybody have the, without revealing the information?
I mean, purchase order or sales order is a very, very easy place to start.
Yeah, I can prove these radishes weren't contaminated, but I'm not giving you my entire supply chain data.
Mhm.
I can prove that we didn't overcharge this customer against a particular regulation in a particular state without giving the state regulator access to our database.
Well said.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Mike. And Nick, before you have to drop, I want to call on you and ask how the IoT event was.
Thanks, Sonal. The IoT event in Santa Clara last week was good. It was very well organized. The expo floor was lightly attended. I was there for about 2 hours. My session was scheduled to be about 20 minutes. Unfortunately, the content before me ran long, so I started late, and my session was starting to overlap the keynotes. So that kind of impacted the audience in my session, but we still had, probably half a dozen folks there. I started with the little bit video, which was very well received, John, and then dove into the standard deck, positioning, of course, for the smart cities and the IoT conference that we were at. There were a few follow-up questions with respect to how people get involved, pointing them back to the website and things of that nature. Overall, it was a pleasant and good experience. I wish the conference was a little more focused. It being a baseline, not clear blockchain topic in an IoT conference, I'm not sure a lot of people understood why they should attend, or why they would come to that session versus the session next door that was, very specific around an IoT device being rolled out by Technicolor or what have you, right? So just something to be aware of. We're going to do a debrief with Jane, hopefully sometime this week, if not early next week, if we can make calendars align. But I would encourage everyone to get familiar with the materials, get comfortable delivering them. And I have an updated version of the deck that has the video embedded in it in a more transportable format, I think is the way to put it. The original file was so big, so for their infrastructure, they wanted it a little bit tighter. So I'll make sure to get that uploaded to the share, and we'll have access to that. So it's a great opportunity. It was nice being in the real world, talking to real people. It wasn't as good as ETH Atlanta because ETH Atlanta was very focused on a narrower kind of domain set, and frankly, there were probably more people at ETH Atlanta.
Yeah, COVID is doing a number on all these events still to this day. Every single one I hear about is lightly attended, is a kind way of putting it. I will say that I think that Nick, thanks for taking one for the team and doing that. I really appreciate it. We know how busy you are with building the new business, the baseline business that you're building. So it's going to be super exciting when you launch that. But I think going forward, there's one area that we really do need to focus on is not so much IoT, but messaging. Right. So I can report that we're in conversations and connected now with the chairs of like AMQP and other messaging protocols. Probably start approaching Kafka, and I could even see a future where, anywhere they're going is where we want to go. Because if you're doing messaging, if you're doing multi-party messaging, you're probably into transformation projects that could use baselining. In fact, I can almost imagine a time when, your implementation of AMQP or Kafka comes with baseline features.
Yeah, the idea of synchronizing systems of record under zero knowledge, using a collection of technologies, right? And one of those technologies just happens to be a blockchain, was very, very well received. It didn't, it was leveraging the maturity of some of these other technologies, right? Like messaging, for example, and was very well received.
One of the big things that you run into with a lot of these smart cities, these initiatives, like Mobi and some of the other ones, is, you're going to have, a lot of different services that are going to be organized, around, a particular user or group of users. and whether it's going to be parking or tolling or paying rideshare services, all of that. The challenge that you run into over there is the consumer is going to want to pay for all those services in a single transaction, and making sure the allocations are done. That's the holy grail, because a lot of times you're dealing with local municipalities, which are not always the most responsive. You've got a lot of bureaucracy that you have to navigate and stuff, and so that's really kind of the holy grail is and within the messaging and stuff. I mean, yeah. Organizing all of that.
Yeah, and those services that they're consuming are often composed of multiple sub-services, to your point, right? Being able to take a single fee and decompose it to all of the other services that have contributed to that value. You're right, absolutely right.
And relative to this whole IoT side of it, and then going back to what Michael was talking about from a publishing perspective, what I think we can still seek to accomplish through the concept of baselining and applying this is we're actually enabling organizations to continue to leverage what they're after, which is building a single source of truth from a data perspective within their organization. And we can help them leverage that accomplishment and what they're all after and trying to do that while being able to actually execute the baselining and the synchronization and doing it in a very privacy preserving way. I think that's really the huge differentiator in a number of these different industries, notably applying that from an IoT perspective. That's such a driver of kind of the future of these analytics from a supply chain perspective, or so many different areas that we're seeing these different use cases start popping up from.
Jack, I love the headband.
Thanks, Nick.
I'm looking for new ways. I'm looking for new ways to deal with my hair. And you're giving me lots of inspiration.
Are you doing house cleaning today, Jack?
Am I doing house cleaning?
Yeah,
got the hair up.
Yeah.
No, it's just getting long. Got to figure it out somewhere or another. Going to go through a couple awkward phases along the way. So
they just get more and more awkward. I'm at the phase now where I can just go back, and I don't know if you wouldn't recognize me. I'd look like Cousin It if I let it go wild.
I'll just keep bringing something totally new each baseline show.
Love it. Love it.
Keep it in heels. Yeah,
so
but, Nick, you were talking about from an IoT perspective.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's been interesting to actually hear a lot of recent use cases that we're seeing from a baseline perspective around IoT. There's been 3 just in the last 2 weeks that have surfaced relative to applying just the one, wanting to find ways to operationalize their business in a huge way, that being a huge driver of it. And then number 2, like getting closer to autonomous procurement operations and things of that effect. And so it's been interesting seeing that really surface recently.
Yeah, and a lot of IoT solutions are really kind of ecosystem related, right? One IoT provider is unlikely to have the whole end-to-end solution, yet the total value is recognized when you can bring the data together to make better decisions ultimately, right? And being able to bring that data together using multiple IoT providers, sharing data in a non-threatening way, right? Under zero knowledge is a great way to do that.
Yeah. Kale,
absolutely.
Kale, if I ask you a question, where do you see the ability to apply some baselining perspective within the Microsoft stack, notably from like an IoT perspective?
I mean, that stack we build over there, we call it Suite, the IoT Suite, has been very much not centralized, like for lack of a better term, like most of that's built by open source components, right? So the ingestion side all the way through to insights, right? The whole flow between like an IoT device from the security aspect and, as I mentioned, like data flowing into how we store it and then how we analyze it. It's all pretty much an OpenStack source. So basically, it's very easy to kind of plug in components there. So I could see on every level that could kind of plug in the ones I just mentioned there, but probably the ones around data sharing would be like low hanging fruit or
huge.
Yeah.
It's interesting, actually, you're talking about kind of a little bit of the traditional Web 2 world, if you will, and the composability that can be layered on from that regard. And we're seeing that be such a driver of kind of this movement from a Web3 perspective, the composability. So it's interesting to see how these worlds are starting to kind of collide.
Hey, gang, I love this community, and I wish I could hang out longer, but I'm late for another call. Look forward to seeing y'all next week.
Thanks, Nick. All right, so back to our General Assembly agenda. We have a few more items, and then we'll open the floor. So really quickly, I'll cover the core devs, which I've given updates on in the last few baseline shows. So I won't repeat too many details, but since the last General Assembly in October, we've had about 40 core devs joining the community, joining the meetings, and working on blips. And on the meeting Monday that we had, Karthik walked through the architecture and code of baseline from a very basic perspective, but we just asked him to kind of take us through baseline from the beginning on how the code works for somebody who's just starting to look at the code. So he hosted that session for us. And right now I'm working with Jack Waring, and we are getting a video put up on our YouTube that can serve as an artifact for developers or those looking to understand the technology moving forward. And also moving forward, we'll start featuring some of our core devs in upcoming sessions, having them show us the code, show us work that they're doing. And hopefully from now through the end of the year, we'll start having some of their work completed that we'll showcase to you. Any questions or comments on our core devs? All right. And last on our list is the roadmap. So John, I'll hand it over to you to cover the road mapping section.
Sure. So again, the TSC is really going to take on a lot of heft with regard to the road mapping. So if anybody is really interested in what we're building going forward, what additional features, what integrations, how everything's structured, docs, tools. We were on a previous call, in fact, the one that made us almost late to this, where we, Mehran Shekri from SAP led a whole session on what things constitute baselining, what things don't, and how systems like SAP, can approach practical applications. It's quite an exciting, I quite like that session. And one of the questions was, what do we need to do in 2022? And my reaction is tools, more tools, docs, and tools. Truffle-like tools, Ganache-like tools, and mostly developer-friendly tools. And oddly enough, developer-friendly doesn't mean GUIs. Developer-friendly means NPM and really, really clear. Here's a library code that you can understand, deploy, test, fool around with, and then start imagining what you can do with it. And I sure hope that that's what we're about to be delivering by the end of the year on a number of fronts, both the Base Ledger and Unibright and Concircle folks, as well as the Provide folks, and a variety of other folks that are not associated with those guys. And that's really important because a standard that only has one implementation isn't a standard, right? So it's important that we also really focus on many different ways of deploying a baseline pattern. I was looking at Matter Labs today and saying, what some parts of Matter Labs you could see implemented in a baseline design pattern. So that was kind of an interesting thought. And again, what would it look like if your Kafka came with baseline pattern features? What if your MQ or AMQP or NATS? In fact, NATS is one of the founding organizations of baseline. So maybe we ought to go back to NATS and say, hey, what would it look like if when somebody got NATS that, they just saw, hey, I can verify, consistency and correctness and attributes of unseen information under zero knowledge, right? Because you can't baseline without messaging. So I think there's a lot to do on the road mapping side. If people out there are interested in what are we going to do next and how do we prioritize it? You don't have to be on the TSC to do that. You don't have to be on a core devs. But actually, probably the fastest way to get involved is through core devs. So core devs will be working things. We're going to set up working groups. We're going to prioritize work, and then on the TSC, it's real working group at this point, because we have decisions to make about where we're going to prioritize, what are we going to spend money on, and who are we going to raise more money from.
Hey, John, just some feedback here, like on the roadmap specifically, like, and again, this is not just being critical. We're as bad as this at Microsoft as anyone, but like, if you go to like the Oasis, like baseline roadmap, like repo,
It's
basically
terrible. No,
like,
it's a mess right now.
yeah, but if you go there, it basically is like, I'll go to Zen Hub and then it's just like a dump, not a dump, but it's like a board of like what's going on there, which is great, like at a detail level. But it's like, if I look at, and I'll post one in the chat window here, but if you look at something like Node.js or something, if you go to their website and go to like what's going on with your releases in the future, they have this really nice thing that basically goes, oh yeah, by this quarter we're doing this and this and this. And it's really like super summarized. And then, yeah, if I want to go get into the guts of like, what's John working on, what's Karthik working on, what's this specific IoT thing, that's great. But just something to think about. Like, I don't know how we could
let's not
summarize
think
that
about
better.
it. Let's do that.
Yeah.
Let's do that. And you're totally right. And again, I think it comes from the highest level down to lower levels. But if we can stay high level to mid level and put that right on the website. There's a lot of website redesign that's coming. Yeah, Kale, thanks for putting that up there. I'll tweet that as well. We can say, look, tools definitely, wouldn't you agree? At a high level, tools are the priority. Simple examples are the priority for certainly the next quarter or two. So we should put that up and say, okay, well, this kind of tool and that kind of tool. Battleship is going to be up. I can't wait for Battleship. I can't wait to be able to run a baseline, simple, two-party Battleship game with two local hosts running and the code right in front of me with here's the section for messaging. Oh, here's where we decided to put nats in, but I could put something else in. Here's the section for setting up the work group between the two local hosts. Oh, I could do that, or I could plug provide in here to make it fancy and enterprise ready, right? Et cetera, just to keep it super clear. And right down to, I'm just running hashes on a Merkle tree. Now I understand Merkle trees. Okay, now I'm going to do proofs on them. I'm going to so that I can understand each component of baselining in a bite-sized way at the developer level. It's almost like the code the developer should experience the code almost like a very well done slideshow, right? Concept that builds on the other concept. It should be a building experience. I'm sure you'd agree that's the first thing we really need to do now. So roadmap, that's a pretty obvious roadmap component. And Excel. I can't wait for the Excel drop. I mean, we've been talking about it for way too long. I want to be able to deploy two instances of Excel and see them baseline. And after that, I want to take a piece. I want to row in a table in Excel that's baselined with SAP or Microsoft Dynamics or SQL Server. And we got to get the SQL Server guys back involved.
All right. And also on the road mapping topic, John, do you want to give a little context for some of our intentions for the next General Assembly on December 8th?
I sense that you're cueing me for something, but could you give me more hints than that?
Yes, I can cover it too, but for the
I
next
tried to avoid it.
Yeah. So for December 8th, our December General Assembly, we're going to make that our target date for all of these moving parts that we're discussing right now. So the Battleship game, the Excel examples, the structure for Get Baselined up on our website. We're going to try and make that end of the year show a big deal for our community where we can wrap things up and get ourselves ready for an exciting 2022. That's what I meant, but anything else on that?
Just one thing, Sonal. This is Sonal. I'm glad that you mentioned this because it's your baby. You're working it, so people should work with Sonal on making, anything that they want to add to the stack of things that we will announce on the 8th. Work with Sonal. Just be aware that you get it in now and get serious about it because we got a month. And in that month, we want to make sure that if there are announcements, we get press in front of it ahead of time, not 10 minutes beforehand. If it's just a blog, that's fine. But we should make sure that there's a light patina of quality control and all of it. It's an open source community, so it ranges there. But yeah, make sure that you're coordinating with Sonal on that, and anybody in the community knows how to do that through the Slack.
Yep. So we'll hopefully have some of our blips completed. Our grant work should be wrapping up by then. We can get some other recipients to present to us, but I'm hoping to make that a big show for us. And
yeah, there's that big DID. I mean, there's what, $40,000 we spent on the DID work, right? So love to see that kind of wrapped up.
Yep. You're muted, Andreas.
It will be, and anybody can see what the progress is, because it's in the repo under issues, the monthly reporting issues at the beginning. Every first Friday of the month, they're dropping it, and there will be a demo before the end of the year.
Awesome.
That's
Thank
it.
you. Cool. So we'll look forward to that next General Assembly. But that is all I had on my formal agenda for today. So I will open up the floor to the group here for any other topics we want to discuss.
Hey, Boris, I saw your new document, the write-up on, hopefully we can drop that on the 8th as well, right? This is the grant on zero knowledge circuits for bonds, which I think are quite exciting.
Yep, we'll work with Boris and Louise actually right after this to work on that publication, and then we'll get it up on our site.
Going to be huge.
I'll take the last second to say all of the TSC members that came before the current TSC group, and we've some people that went from the last one to this one, but there are several that are not on the new TSC. They did a tremendous service. People like Anna, Isa, Frank, and Connor, and so many others. We're going to be sending something nice your way. And we just want to express our gratitude to you for getting us where we are.
Yep. Any other topics or questions before we wrap up? All right, I think we can conclude our November General Assembly then. Thank you all for joining, and thank you for those who tuned in on YouTube. You're muted, John. There you go.
We're not hearing baseline.
You're not, yeah.
There you go. All right, thank
How we
you.
do?